Welcome back to Soulful Prosperity. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce a guest whose mission aligns so beautifully with my core values of abundance, ease, and living in alignment with our highest selves. Joining us is Drasko Raicevic. Hope I said it right. CEO of Peacefully Ambitious and a powerhouse in coaching business owners to transform their mental health struggles into peace, ease, and stress-free profit. I love that. Through his identity upleveling process, Drasko helps entrepreneurs shift from stress and overwhelm to clarity and purpose. On a personal note, Drasko applied twice to be on the reality show Survivor. I can't wait to hear that story. And he's also an adventurer who's dived with reef sharks in Thailand and holds a black belt in karate. His most important message as a business owner, peaceful profits are the only profits worth pursuing. Amen. And by the way, he's my coach and single-handedly has gotten me over my people-pleasing patterns. Really, really good stuff, powerful stuff. I'm so excited to have him here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was probably one of the best introductions I think anybody's had on any of the podcasts that I've actually guested on. So thank you very much for such a
turn it into a reel and use it over and over. Make me famous. Well, it's easy. It was really short and well written, and I like it. I like that. I like that about you. You're just to the point. So the show is Soulful Prosperity, and the listeners want to hear your journey, how you got to where you are, the failures, the triumphs, the lessons, who you had to become, what you had to overcome, and what's next.
Yeah, 100%. So as all of these stories, like they are bred out of a lot of failures and bumps along the way, right? Like we always wish it was so good and smooth, etc. So really, like where my story started is like I had a very traditional path, like early on in life, especially for like an immigrant kid. So like I was born in Serbia. We moved to Canada when I was 8, and then kind of followed the very like traditional immigrant values of that. Like you go to school, you get good marks, nothing else matters. Like the only thing is how well you do in school. So it was both like a blessing and a curse, because like I naturally liked learning quite a lot, and I was like good at it. So school for the most part, probably to like high school, came like very easily. And then it was also like very reinforced with regards to like my parents and stuff like that. So the good part about it was, as long as I did well in school, I could kind of do whatever it is that I want. Like it was like one of the kind of conditional love pieces that I eventually had to overcome myself. But one of the things that I got into very early on was martial arts. And I did that for about 16, 17 years, like pretty regularly. Somebody's competing, like kind of training 2 times a day, like just immersing myself in that in addition to school. And in that process, I got into coaching very young. Like it was basically teaching classes. By the time I was 16, teaching like kids classes, and that evolved into teaching like kind of more the young adult classes, and then eventually like even teaching like adults, etc. So I went into school to like business school because I thought, okay, well, that seems pretty applicable like everywhere, to kind of follow the typical like 9-to-5 road. And very quickly after graduating, I realized like this is not for me, like at all. Like this is not where I'm going to find any sort of happiness. So at that time, like the only thing that I was actually doing that I enjoyed doing was like teaching. In that instance, it was like kind of cardio kickboxing classes after I finished my job. So I was like, okay, well, why don't I just try and make money doing this thing? Like people seem to pay and like want to come to these classes. Like, why don't I just try doing this? So I did. And eventually people started coming to me for weight loss, and it started to kind of pick up. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to quit, and I'm going to go and figure out how to do this thing, which is kind of what started my whole like coaching career. So quickly as people started coming in, I realized like, oh, like this whole like cardio kickboxing thing, like it's fun, but it's like not really the way to go for helping people with like weight loss and stuff like that. So that kind of led me into this space of like, okay, well now I got to figure out how do I actually like do personal training? How do I do nutrition? Right. And I've had my own struggles with regards to like weight and like losing weight and all the things that came along with that. So I also want to learn it for myself. So I started getting into basically fitness, lifestyle, all of that. And in 2010, I opened up what was essentially my own weight loss studio. Like it started off as a boot camp, but eventually became like a weight loss studio where we basically focused on like the really hard cases as far as like weight loss, meaning like people that had a lifelong struggle with weight and they didn't know what to do with it, you know? And what I didn't realize at the time is I was actually doing life coaching through the vehicle of fitness, right? That's what kind of did everything all in one. And that's kind of the hint to where it eventually led. But I ran that business for 10 years, got it to a small team of like 4 employees, had a bunch of other like contracts, et cetera, that I've had like online that, you know, supported the business in many different ways. I even built my own nutrition app while like that we use for the nutrition coaching portion to kind of like automate that. So everything on paper about that business was like correct. It was right. I had people look at it. They're like, yeah, you're doing all the things. I got all of the coaching. Like I followed the path that you're supposed to follow to be like a successful, that instance, like fitness, you know, business owner. And in literally 10 years to the month. So I opened it in January 2010. January 2020, I was forced to basically close that business down because I imploded everything that was right on paper. So the reason I imploded that business that was right on paper is it was essentially operating on so many of these like emotional and mental blind spots that I now coach business owners to basically avoid. So in many ways, that business existed as a proxy to help me find my own worthiness, right? I was like, if I could just make this business successful, then maybe somehow I can actually be okay. Like I can feel good about myself. I can be okay. I can validate the fact that I am good enough and I made the right decision to do this. So basically, I was having the business to prove that I was actually good enough, which is the absolute worst reason to have a business, because the business sole purpose is like, it's got to make you enough money to power the life that you want to live, right? Which is what this whole idea of peaceful profits is all about. So after that crashed, and it was a blessing in disguise because it happened right before COVID. So it's like, if I had kept it going and gotten like into more debt to keep it going, it would have been even way worse because I would have had to close in March of that year. So it's a blessing in disguise of like when it actually happened, you know? So as always, like the universe works in funny ways like that way, right? So I went on this like major journey of like basically reinventing myself. Like at that point, it was like this identity that I had forever is now completely lost. I'm completely unemployable because like I'm not really going to like make enough money to pay back this debt being a personal trainer for like another gym. And I don't really even want to do that. So I started to figure out, okay, like, what am I going to do next? So like one part of me was like healing all of these aspects of myself. And I was trying to figure out, navigate what was next. And what was next was the only thing I knew how to do that had any sort of like a high income skill or whatever was like, I built my business the way that most businesses or fitness businesses aren't built, which is like community and referrals. Like we obviously had that, but the majority of my business was actually built through like running local Facebook ads. So I ran it like an internet marketer in many ways. So I started making like funnels and stuff like that for other coaches that I knew. And I quickly realized like, okay, this was starting to pick up. I was like actually getting like retainers and all of that. But I quickly realized like, I'm going down the same road again. Like I do not really want to build an agency. I'm not really that excited about doing this work. What I'm actually excited about is like coaching the business owner. Like, why isn't all this marketing stuff actually being like utilized in the right way? Why are they sabotaging themselves? And that's where I had to get honest with myself kind of the second time and be like, okay, clearly there is something deeper here. And I do not want to make the same essentially identity mistake twice. So I got honest with that. And I moved into basically doing like coaching the human behind the entrepreneur so they could be better business owners. Right. And that had a few other different iterations to kind of come to this idea of, okay, well, what I really do is help business owners have more peaceful profits and operate like a peacefully ambitious CEO. And that came about through that decision. And around that time, I started a podcast because I was like, if I can't like lead with results ahead of time, because like everybody's a coach, like there's so many coaches with it. It's like, how do you differentiate yourself? Well, I'm like, if I can't take a stranger and in an hour get them some sort of insight, then I probably shouldn't be doing this. So I started this podcast to basically say, okay, if you want to come on, I'll record the conversation of me coaching you, and then a small percentage of those people end up becoming clients, right? And that literally is how I've built this 6-figure business off of, a podcast that never was intended to like be a podcast, but it just ended up becoming a unique way to like get my own clients. So anyway, long story short, like that's the string of failures that kind of led me to basically get honest with myself about what my actual gift is and what it is that I actually do. And like, even when I look back on like some old journals and I was like reading what would be the ideal thing, it's like coaching, learning things, and like figuring out how to like share the things that I learned. Like a lot of the things were along that. I was like, this is exactly what I do now. So it's been this interesting journey to really get honest with myself and figure out how does that translate into like adding value into the world. So that's kind of long story short of how I got here.
Wow. So first of all, I didn't even realize, right? Because in a coaching vessel, it's all about me, right? I didn't even realize how much we had in common. I didn't even realize the peaceful profits part until I read your bio. It's like Soulful Prosperity. That's not the name of my business, but it's the name of the result, right? That I look for in working with my clients. But that whole part about losing your identity, your persona, and like just having it disappear and then having to figure that out, I've been through that, and that's like intense. And that it's a beautiful gift in the end, because if like, I honestly, like, no matter what's going on, and a lot about what's going on in my life, at the end of the day or in any given moment, if I can say to myself, I know who I am, I'm grounded. Like, I'm grounded, and I'm 53 years old. It took me 50 years or 51, 50, whatever, right, to get there. So yeah, that's a blessing. So anybody that's listening that's in that space, or it's like, just even making every decision in your life based off the fear of losing anything is just not the space you want to be in or live in. Like, just when you get to know who you are and know you're going to be okay no matter what, that's where you start to have peace and soulful prosperity and peaceful profit.
Yeah.
And then that whole journey about figuring out what you really like to do, same thing. Even though I was in real estate, it was the coaching of the real estate agents that I loved. I really didn't like selling houses. I didn't give a shit what house you bought. Stop asking me questions. Like, just buy a house, so yeah, really good stuff. Good stuff.
That's why I always say like real recognizes real. So like that's exactly why like you're seeing the parallels. And yes, you're right. In a coaching container, like you're paying me to focus on you. So that's why these details didn't come out, which is actually why I'm so excited, because it's actually the first like podcast I've done that's actually of a client. So it's a cool experience for me.
Yeah.
What I was just going to add to that is like, yes, I agree with you. Like the price of admission for that authenticity oftentimes is high. Like in theory, it doesn't have to be, but generally it tends to be like after a crash. But it's like, even though the price is very high, it's so worth it on the opposite end, right? Because even if you look at anybody who you likely follow online, like there are probably people that like you follow and you're like, okay, they probably say good things. But then there are other people who you follow who's like, it is their essence that I'm essentially like attracted to. And then the stuff they say is also good, right? But that like the reason we are so magnetized by those people is because they have done the work they needed to do and continue to evolve in expressing like what is authentically them in that moment, right? And even this like authenticity, again, is something that's overused quite a bit. Like, to me, authenticity is just to what degree can you be in the world without filter. Like, so whatever filter I need to put to be liked, to be okay, to be perceived a particular way, like all of those are basically friction points to me expressing what is authentically me, right? So the more you can do that, the easier it becomes, because then you don't have those issues of loss. Like, how can you lose something that's authentically never actually gone,
Right.
right? Like, that is why, like, one of the things that there's a small subset of my clients where it's like the empty success. Like, I have all of the material success, but I feel empty inside. Why? Because these filters exist on top of that that don't allow you to experience, and or you've created this thing that's based off of shoulds that doesn't actually serve who you authentically are, right? So a lot of my work in that case becomes, okay, well, how do we eliminate the filters so we can see your truest essence, and then translate that into, okay, well, what's it actually look like within the business, right? Which I know is exactly kind of what you do with your programs as well. But like, that's the essence. We'll just do it in our own way, and people will connect with it, to which part resonates most. But that's essentially what it's about to me.
I love that. And you know what? You just made me think of something. Like, people think authenticity is being loud and opinionated. Meanwhile, you're carrying somebody else's opinion. Typically, it's not even an original thought. Like, it's not like, oh, I could speak my mind. Like, like, that's not what authenticity is. It's going back to that, like, I know who I am. And a big part of that, like the persona that I had to build to be this, leader in the real estate industry, was like this party girl persona. Party girl ounce in me. Like, don't get me wrong. We went out to karaoke a few weeks ago and we had a ton of fun, but then like the owner keeps calling, like, you guys are coming, right? It'll take me like 6 months before I want to do that again, right? It was fun and I sang. But that's what authenticity is. It's not just being blunt and speaking your mind. And it feels like that's the definition that has been taken on. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I think, so one of the other things I always talk about is, like, your primary strengths become your first distortions. So what does that actually mean? So you have a natural strength of, like, I'm good with people when I need to be, like, I enjoy being out there. And there's a part of me that really enjoys, expressing in this social way, but like, that's not the complete part of you. So when that strength ends up being exploited, let's just say unconsciously, like, ooh, this is when I get love and this is when people actually like me. Now let me use it all the time, right? Well, if I got to use it all the time, that means I got to be that party girl that's turned to a 10 all of the time. Well, now you've taken the strength that you have and you've actually distorted it into something that isn't authentic. Like, is you with this filter of, like, I need to turn this up all the time, otherwise I won't be liked, right?
Yeah.
So when people do this, like, fake authenticity that you're talking about, because they're loud and boisterous and putting on masks and getting out there, like, all you are actually doing is you are, like, setting the volume higher on the woundings that basically keep you from actually expressing who you are without filter, right? So you are presenting the thing that's going to get you the attention, which is just a proxy for something that you feel like you're missing, right? Now, that's hard to realize when you're in it, and it kind of takes something to be like, for you to step back. It's a lot easier to recognize from the outside. But usually that fake authenticity, that fake vulnerability, like, kind of cry for attention type of thing, that's usually what it is. It's coming from a distorted, either wounded place or a distorted use of the strength that you naturally have. When you remove that distortion, then, like, you get a step closer to that piece of, like, okay, well, I know who I am, so I don't need to be a party girl here. Like, take it or leave it, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
the person who's got the power is the person that can just walk away from the situation. Like, in any negotiation, it's I don't need to
Yeah.
be here, like, later, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
the ultimate power in the negotiation. So yes, long story short, I do agree with that particular assessment.
And then also, I hope my internet's working okay, but also vulnerability. You just nailed it there too. Like, vulnerability isn't being a victim. Vulnerability is being able to communicate your fears or things that you're concerned with, or your hopes and dreams when you're afraid to do that, and it takes the courage to do it. It's not about complaining and crying and just voicing complaint. Like, that definition has been distorted as well. And I guess that boils down to a very similar type thing.
Yeah, because I mean, with vulnerability, like Brene Brown talks about this a lot. Like one of the inherent qualities of vulnerability is like there's an inherent risk to doing it.
Yes.
Meaning, if you do share the thing you're about to share, there is a risk that you are going to be hurt in some sort of way, right? That is kind of what makes the whole process vulnerable, and why vulnerability A requires courage, and B why it's rare. So it's like when you see those instances where people are crying essentially for attention, well, there's no actually inherent risk there, because the actual thing that you want is the attention, right? The irony of all of this is like the person doing this thing is not going to connect to this at all. It's going to be one of those like, yeah, the audience is like seeing this. But I think the important part is then like, if any of this resonates with you, then you're basically starting to ask yourself, okay, well, where do I do this? Like, this doesn't apply to me directly, but in what instances may it do that? Where do I play victim to get attention, right? Where do I try to manipulate the situation to get a particular thing? That's going to be the indicator of like, okay, well, what need am I actually trying to fill through the outside versus through the inside, where it's the only place that it can actually be filled.
So good. And, this conversation, you're right, it's not going to get to the people who need it. However, the people pleasers of the world, like, it's important to be able to differentiate that. Like, that is not vulnerability. That is manipulation. And I've always said this and thought this, but you helped me to embody it. And sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for people is not put up with their bullshit. And, that's a big lesson. That was a huge, huge, huge lesson, because I had a lot of that in my life, a lot of that. And I kind of enabled it. Not kind of, I completely enabled it. But it also, going back to what you said about your business, the fixing people, because it's really easy for me. Right now I do it for a living. It validated me, right? So that fake vulnerability made me feel comfortable because I could fix and I can help you and I can, soothe you. So, but that's not authentic either.
Correct. It's not. And I mean, I guess number one, I think I'm so happy to hear like how that piece has landed for you. I mean, I know I've seen you embody this and have like real examples of how it's positively impacted you, but that lesson for people pleasers is probably number one, right? That like I'm actually contributing actively to this pattern that I don't actually like. And at the core of it, like people pleasing is actually lying. Like, I know it's not like the thing that like it's always described
and
as
selfish,
like, people pleasing,
and selfish.
110% selfish, right? But it's lying, because if you say yes when you mean no, it doesn't matter that the other party receives it as nice. You are still actively lying. Like, you are lying to what is authentically the thing you want to do. So now that other person is actually getting into a relationship, not with 100% of you, because that's covered. They're getting into a relationship with 60% of you, right? So that is why then it perpetuates, because now you always have to show up as the 60% version of yourself, because that's what they got into relationship with. So that lie then continues to perpetuate, right? And that's the hardest part to realize, is like, I'm a contributing factor to this. I'm an active participant in this. I've actively been lying to them, but primarily to myself. And then it's like, when you change and you're like, well, no, I got to show 80, 90, whatever percent of myself. I got to express what it is that I actually want, which is, this is actually a no. It's not a yes for me. The irony is, for people pleasers, you are actually the one changing the dynamic of the relationship. The other party in that context is actually innocent, because they got into a relationship with 60%. Yes. That's on you.
Yes.
Right? Which is why there's always this tumultuous period in transition for people pleasers, where like you actually have to, like, the first part is getting honest with that and then expressing. And the second part is, now you actually have to do damage control until you get out of this. And then the new relationships that form after that, because you are now more expressed, that's why they kind of go into these stories of like, well, now I am surrounded by people that support me, are more authentically me, etc. And that is true. That is why the path for people pleasers is oftentimes much more complicated than like other patterns, because you have that damage control you're going to do in the middle.
And then when you get into, energetics and consciousness and get into that level, I completely realize, so not only can I not be angry at the people who got the better end of my pattern. Let's just put it that way. You know, it was me. But I more than likely blocked them from their own divine plan for what the universe had in store for them because I was enabling the behavior. Like that is really more mind-blowing than when you go back to sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is not put up with people's bullshit, because then they are forced to have their own self-actualization.
100%. And it's that distinction between, like, what's the difference between kind and nice? So like if you take a different example, it's like, okay, let's just say I have somebody who like can kind of walk, like they crippled, but they can kind of walk, and their goal is they want to climb up this mountain. So the nice thing that I can do is I can pick them up and I can carry them up that mountain so they can enjoy the view. The kind thing is I can be beside them, going at a much slower pace, supporting them, like through their own empowerment to cripple their way or to, like, you know, make their way up, however they're going to make their way up that mountain, so that they can use their own empowerment to actually get up that mountain. Like that outcome, even though we're seeing the exact same view from that energetic spiritual perspective, is so much more juicy because they have gone through the journey to do that. And you have not enabled kind of the lower vibration version of that journey. Right. And we'll, especially people pleasers, but we all do this, like, it's just what degree do you do it? But it's like, we default to nice because it always gets us the social nod. But oftentimes the no is what's actually the kind thing, right? To say the no, to do whatever. So yeah, that is such an important one that happens in all different contexts. So yeah.
Well, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's one of the leading spiritual teachers, I don't know if you know who he is. Well, he's passed, but he has rules when he's creating a safe container, and you read the guidelines, and one of the guidelines is, may you always be kind and never be nice.
Okay.
Yeah. And like a lot of people get hung up on it, but then when they understand it and begin to embody it, and this is, you know, the role of a mentor is really to make sure that you can embody that with love, with compassion, you know, with all those things. But there's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. How did you get this smart? Like, where did you gain this knowledge? People say this to me all the time, because like, I'm a high school dropout and I did not go to college, and like, where did I get mine? I went through the school of hard knocks, and I mean, you did too. But like, when you're telling me at 16 you were like coaching people, you were born with a gift. So where do you attribute it to, this ability to help people like this?
Well, I mean, number one, thank you. I appreciate that. Number two, I think the first bit of irony is like, okay, for anybody watching the video of this, there's like a stack of books behind me. And I have read like probably 60-70% of these, like front to back, right? Not all of them, but the majority of them. And I think most of my smarts don't actually come from those books. I think that was actually a big crutch for me going forward, because I tried to outlearn my way through a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Right. And I was trying to basically outthink and outlearn my way through what were actually emotional problems. So I think the big part of why I connect things together so well is, I think, yes, part of it is just the gift of being able to see a lot of different patterns. And like, I do really well with like, oh yeah, okay, in all this chaos, like this is the order. I think I've just been like that definitely, I agree, is a natural gift. And then the coaching bit, I think, is a natural gift, just the propensity to be with people and to like hold the space to guide them to the next thing. Those I agree with are natural. I think the part that's not natural, and it's very intentional, is the emotional bit. Right. And if I interpret this through like the, you know, story arc of like my soul or whatever, I think I had to be born into an environment where that was totally like not even a factor. And listen, in all due respect, it's like I grew up with very like loving parents. They just were not loving in the way that I needed to be loved, nor did they have the capacity to really like manage my emotional needs, right? Like that just wasn't them. But I had to basically learn and unlearn a lot of the aspects surrounding my emotions. So I do a lot of, so I have this like rule of 100 where if I have a particular, so for example, when I was going through my whole like re-identity, right? Like when I closed my studio and I had to figure out what was next, whatever money I could muster, I would invest it into some type of healers, whether it was like energy healers, it was other coaches, it was therapists. Like I kind of went through the gamut of a bunch of different things to figure out like what the hell went wrong. And whenever I came across somebody that did something with me that worked, I would then inquire, okay, well, what modality did I actually use? Like, how did they do what they did? So I started then diving into learning about all of these, like I would read, psychology books, I would read spiritual books, I would take whatever was in those and I would find a practice. So let's just say, I don't know, I read a book on like busting beliefs. And in this book, there was a process on how do you like bust beliefs. I would go through that process for 100 times with myself. Like, and I would rule of 100 is like, I don't teach anything until I've repeated it 100 times. Like for example, I started tracking that with like, if you ever read Byron Katie's, like The Work, right? Like the whole process of inquiry. So like I literally did like pages and pages of just me doing inquiry on different thoughts. So I did that with like any single modality that I ran across with. And even just to give you like a present example. So if you're familiar with like internal family systems and parts work, it's one of the things that I use.
Yep.
So anyway, it doesn't matter, but like that's a modality that I use quite a bit in my coaching, especially when we're dealing with any like emotional stuff. So on my laptop, I have an open document that when I go do my own parts work, I will basically self-dialogue and like write that out on the computer. Last time I checked, that had close to 300 8x11 pages of just typed out stuff, right? So a lot of it has come from basically the attitude that I developed in martial arts, which was just like, you just kind of drill, right? Like and it's more for a jiu-jitsu thing. There's a saying like drillers are killers. Why? Because the more you've drilled something, the more it just becomes like a part of you, and you just kind of like do it. So I apply that to these modalities, which is why it's become so easy to have an entrepreneur on the other side of me. They express whatever it is that they express, and I can right away know where to guide them to go into these things. And then I will learn something from all of my readings. And I think naturally my brain will just make the connection between like, okay, so like nice versus kind, that's just not like a nice story. Like that's actually a filter. It's like a mental model for, well, how do I interpret the issue that this person is having? How do I interpret this in terms of my life, of how I can navigate? Like it becomes a lens through which I view the situation. And because I have one filter of like, okay, well, this is the mental model I got to run it through, then it's just a matter of like using those principles in the right situation instead of just like memorizing facts. So I don't know, that really like answered.
No, and yeah, no, I get it. And I just learned a bit, going through the drills. Now I got to read The Work. I'm like looking around for a pen. The Work, and then there was something else you said.
Yeah, well, internal family systems, I think is a big one.
Yeah, because I know something about this. Really, really powerful stuff. So look, coaching with you is one of the best decisions that I made, and I love it because like I didn't even know who you were. I'm just going on a random podcast. I signed up for something. There's like this free, you can pay for it if you want to be on like a million podcasts, but I knew I just wanted to like be collaborating and see what's out there. I forget what it's called. And then I think you messaged me. Well, I don't know if I messaged you. You must message new people.
Yeah, my assistant on my behalf will like message everyone. So it's very likely that I messaged you.
And I don't even remember like being on and like, I don't know what, like it just, okay, let's coach. And it was huge impact, huge. And I'm one of those that thinks I'm smarter than anybody and everybody. So if I'm handing out that kind of compliment, it's a big deal. So if somebody wants to work with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I think best thing, Peacefully Ambitious CEO on Instagram is probably the best place to like reach out to me if you want to talk to me directly. Right now, if you want to go to my website, it is at uplevelmind.com. So that's kind of like the old branding of all of this. Peacefullyambitiousceo.com also works, but I'm in the process of actually updating that. But yeah, if you want to talk to me directly, Peacefully Ambitious CEO on Instagram is probably the easiest place to do that.
Amazing. Well, I am forever grateful to you. You have made a huge impact and difference in my life, in how I see myself. That was the one thing I wanted to say before. This really all boils down to communication, right? Having the courage and the strength to be able to communicate, and then also having the intuition and knowing yourself enough to know how to communicate and what you want to communicate. And like, it's crazy how that just boils down to that topic, and which is a topic I'm doing tomorrow on Empower Hour. I've been working on communication all week, and I've been working on different levels of studying communication, and such good stuff. I could go on and talk to you forever, so we'll have to have you back someday soon. And thank you so much. Anything else, last thing you want to get out to everybody?
Well, no, just number one, I think that this was actually really fun because the conversation flowed so nicely. And I know there's a lot of synergy in terms of like how we think about particular things. And, I know your story and you're finding out things about me. So it was like I don't do a lot of podcasts, but like this was like really fun. So I just want to thank you for making this container. Thank you for all the kind words. And like, I'm happy to be on whenever you want to bring me on. So
cool. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you soon.